Good evening and welcome to Greater Somerville for April 2nd, 2013. I'm Joe Lynch. For the past several years, the City of Somerville has been planning for the reconstruction of Beacon Street in Somerville. The reconstruction project of utility upgrades, street and sidewalk repair and repaving, as well as required ADA compliance upgrades, is scheduled to be funded using state and federal funds. In the spring of 2012, the city incorporated, as part of that project, a cycle track or separated bike path into the project. It currently is not known exactly how much the proposed cycle track will increase the overall cost of the $4.5 million project. Incorporating the cycle track also has the potential to eliminate as many as 80 on-street parking spaces, relocation of bus stops, utilities, HP parking spots, and additional crosswalks. Last week on this show, my co-host Cayenne Anderson had as her guests Somerville's Director of Transportation Hayes Morrison and Independent Transportation Consultant Mark Chase. They spoke about the city's cycle track plan and provided a status report of the project. Tonight, my guests will discuss the current plans, its benefits and potential pitfalls to not only the residents and businesses of the affected Beacon Street neighborhood, but will also speak to what they perceive as a seriously flawed and potentially dangerous design of the proposed cycle track. In full disclosure to the viewing public, I now serve at the request of the mayor on the Transportation Review Initiatives and Planning Committee, which is studying and recommending to the city a multitude of short and long-range initiatives associated with all aspects of Somerville's transportation needs. To discuss the Beacon Street reconstruction project and the proposed cycle track installation is Ward 2 resident and cyclist Samantha Coren, an avid cyclist, former board member of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition, and former board of directors member of the League of American Cyclists, John Allen. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us on.
On this lovely busy evening here in Union Square, where we see more cyclists than we see in any other square, I think, in Somerville. But Samantha contacted me as well as John, and after watching last week's show, wanted some equal time to talk about their perception and their initiatives and some of the things that the residents and businesses and bicyclists are talking about for the cycle track. So I wanted to start off, and I talked to Sam and John before the show. I wanted to start off just kind of framing that, so my intro was a little bit longer than it usually is. But I'm going to start asking some questions, and we're going to set it up. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sam and John to talk about their analysis of that current cycle track. So either one of you, when did the city first propose reconstructing Beacon Street?
So Somerville, and Hayes talked about this on the last show, they've been trying to redo Beacon Street since 1999, when I was in 7th grade. So this has been a long time coming for this community. And then, there have been issues with the funding. It got picked up again, I think, around 2007, and then the funding didn't come through again. Congressman Capuano requested in 2010 federal funding to redo the whole street, bury the utilities, the whole works, just like Somerville Ave, but the funding wasn't as much as the city hoped for, and so now, it's next in line, but with a lot less funding than they originally wanted. And because of that, they can't bury the utilities. It's only a full-depth reconstruction of the street. It's not, a full streetscape kind of project.
Okay. So is it now fully funded, Sam, at this point, or is it still, my understanding is it's still going through the design phase?
Yes, it's still in the design phase. 80% funded by the federal government, 20% by Mass DOT. They did a 25% design hearing, and Mass DOT, I don't think it's been approved just yet. I know the city is working really hard to hit a design deadline and have it out for bid by September, I believe, so it qualifies for funding.
Okay, and the city doesn't normally do these types of mega, street repavement and traffic mitigation, traffic projects on their own, they have hired an outside consultant.
Yes. The design engineers contracted by the city are Design Consultants, Inc. They've redone Somerville Avenue most recently.
Yeah, they've done a lot of city business. They've done Magoon Square, they've done Somerville Ave, now they're contracted to do Beacon Street. So, one quick question, because it was asked of me earlier, has Design Consultants ever done that type of cycle track installation before?
No, I don't believe they've done, protected bicycle accommodations. They've definitely done a lot of bicycle treatments recently, more recently on Somerville Ave.
Surface roadway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a point about that.
Sure.
The word protected sort of sticks in my throat because we'll get to some of the safety issues later. It's often that people use the word protected, but you've got to really know whether you're actually being protected.
All in the nomenclature, though, isn't it, John?
Yes.
So how did the public first find out about the Beacon Street reconstruction project, and then subsequently about the cycle track installation?
So the first public meeting was held back in September 2012.
Okay.
From my understanding, it was a very small email list that they used, and the first two meetings in September and October were well represented by the cycling advocates who were pushing very hard for this new bicycle treatment to happen on Beacon Street. Some business owners were contacted by mail, but not all of them. And it really wasn't until November, when the neighborhood started getting aware of what was going on, that these meetings were happening and they weren't necessarily notified. It was, I think, after the October meeting, some of the business owners finally started talking to the customers, and it's like, do you know what's happening on Beacon Street? Do you know what's happening on Beacon Street? And it's a real testament to this community how important those businesses are, that, they're letting, the neighborhood know, like, hey, the city is holding these meetings. Did you know about this? So, the neighborhood didn't really understand what was happening until November.
So it's interesting. I just, want to make sure that the folks at home know about the timing. So the first citywide or neighborhood-wide generally advertised public meeting was in September?
Back in September, yes.
In September, because, as you know, there's a plethora of information out there on the city's website and other sources that DCI submitted to the Massachusetts Highway Department their initial design exception report in July, which was 2 months prior to the first public meeting. So I just want to make sure folks get the sequencing.
Yes. And in July, they were already sort of submitting these things to Mass DOT. And I've just started getting involved in attending these bicycle committee meetings because they're doing a lot of great work, and I want to understand more about what's going on with the project, because it seems like they're usually first to know about these changes to the design. Yep. So, if you look at, I believe, the July minute meetings, Hayes Morrison came to them and told them about, the stuff that was in that report. And a lot of them, they didn't get a chance to review the design. And it seemed like they were a little upset about this, that stuff was being sent to Mass DOT before they had a chance to sort of weigh in and vet these designs.
Okay. So now that we've had a series of, I think it's 4 or 5 public meetings, 3, 4, 5 public meetings where people have weighed in, what is the general sense? I mean, we've all read the blogs, we've all read the news articles. Folks who are advocating one way or another are eloquent in terms of trying to state their case. What is the general sense? And if you can, either John or Sam, kind of give the folks at home, there seems to be the group that doesn't want to lose any parking on Beacon Street.
Yeah, there is that.
And there is a group that is saying, we love this, moving ahead with this cycle track. And there is a third group that has entered into the discussion saying, we have serious reservations about how the city is moving ahead with this cycle track. So you contacted me. I'm going to try to step back a little bit and let you and John talk about what you've discovered about the cycle track design, about the process, and about what you think should be done moving ahead with Beacon Street reconstruction.
Well, the general feel in the neighborhood, and I've kind of alluded this before, and just the lack of notification about these meetings, you know, the neighborhood feels like they haven't really had a fair chance to state, you know, what they would like to see happen to Beacon Street. You know, we didn't really become involved in this process until, like you said, after they started making these submissions to Mass DOT. They had a Share-It-style meeting in January, a month before the 25% design hearing, and there was still only, you know, one design concept. And, you know, when the neighborhood started getting more aware of this late fall, you know, there were petitions going around, letters going around. You know, the neighborhood doesn't want the parking removal, obviously. And, I mean, honestly, that's how I first became aware of the project. You know, and I'll talk about issues with the parking as well. But when I kind of understood more about the design, it just felt really incomplete. And I think that's one thing people who are for and against this track agree on. It's not really a complete design, you know, and we'll talk more about that later. But, you know, the fact that, you know, it's not the same kind of layout all the way through from Porter Square to Inman Square, you know, there's a lot of boundaries, you know, physical with the road and, you know, social with parking demands and all these other things going on. And so, you know, my neighbors and I, we kind of pulled our collective consciousness together to come up with, you know, what works for everyone. You know, we're not saying that parking is more important than lives at all. I mean, we can definitely afford to cough up a few spaces just for sightlines alone at these intersections. But we definitely need to get more space on the road, clearly, if we're talking about getting rid of whole sides of parking from the street. And so, you know, some people at the meeting, they referred to it as the Olmsted design, David Olmsted, my neighbor. And if you want to know more about this, you can check it out on beaconstreetsomerville.org. You know, we can actually bump in the curbs a little bit between the utility poles without moving them and have, you know, bike lanes consistently all the way down Beacon Street outside of the door zone.
So let me stop you just for a minute, Sam, because it's taken me, since you folks contacted me, it's taken me 6 days to get through some of the documentation. But briefly, and maybe in layman's terms, describe to folks that Beacon Street is going to be reconstructed at some point. It's going to be repaved, the sidewalks are going to be redone, it's going to be brought into ADA compliance. This cycle track does not run the length of Beacon Street.
No, it does not.
It's a very short stretch of Beacon Street where this elevated 3 inches, John? Is it 3 inches up off of the surface roadway to give the bicyclists elevation away from the street level?
Mostly to create a distinction between what is the street and what is where the bicyclists are supposed to be riding.
Rather than what motorists are used to, which is the white line, the white solid line indicating a bike lane.
Yes.
Right.
Although on one side, actually, it will be a bike lane because it'll be adjacent to the travel lane, the regular travel lane, but raised 3 inches.
Okay.
And
now you folks have some graphics. Do you want to go to the graphics and start familiarizing folks with what Beacon Street may look like?
Let's push this magic button here.
So, just to quickly touch on the issues with the parking. So they did a parking study starting in May. They did 3 counts, I believe. They did some counts in May and some counts in June. But one of the issues is that with this design is that the Washington to city line section is actually the city is proposing to keep the same exact layout that's there today. So you have currently 2 bike lanes next to 2 lanes of parking. The parking study they did said, okay, we can't get rid of parking here because it's too used. So that was what they referred to as Zone 2. It's down in the southern portion.
Here, let me get my mouse pointer.
And the longer...
There.
So
Right
this
there,
is
yeah.
Zone 2.
So if you could, just for the folks at home, take them from where you are now and move your cursor up
Yeah.
and show them where we are on Beacon Street. I take it we're just about from the city line.
Going
Okay,
from
where
the
are we
city
going?
line all the way to Washington Street,
Yeah.
that's going to be the same exact thing that there is today.
So
Obviously,
no loss of
Oh.
parking.
no loss of parking.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we moved.
Well,
There you
I'm
go.
back. It's
All right, so
okay.
the whole thing that's encircled above that,
Yeah.
that was referred to as Zone 1 in the parking study, where they're going to take away parking on the even
That's
side,
here.
the even side of the street from Oxford to Museum up here
Okay.
in the pink.
Okay.
But that actually had the same parking level usage as Zone 2, that little pink strip, and
So
it's the same size.
You're talking about all the work that DCI has done, Design Consultants has done, to analyze the current conditions.
Yes.
Right, okay.
And then the red zone, this is where it gets a little interesting. So the red zone is what I refer to from Museum to Park Street right now
There
as
we
sort
go.
of the doldrums of Beacon Street. This is where you have unused parking. And this is actually where some of the bicycle advocates were doing their surveys of the cyclists. Like, hey, let's take the unused parking on Beacon Street and build a cycle track. And if you were just biking past that empty stretch of meters that residents don't park at, it's just, there's nothing there,
It
really.
would be obvious that
Oh,
there
yeah.
was an excess of parking.
Yeah, and when honestly, when I thought we were just getting rid of parking in this red space because everyone knows no one parks there. So what DCI did was that they averaged this all together, so it made it seem like parking usage was artificially low to justify getting rid of this parking. Meanwhile, it just doesn't make sense because Zone 2, the Washington to Inman Square part, that's just as close to,
Here.
you could have just split this up pretty evenly and done a fairer distribution.
I think there was an issue also with the dates when the parking study was done.
Yeah, so DCI made a big point to say we're going to do a parking count date when schools were out of session, the colleges. And then it was revealed that the first day they did the count was way after commencement.
All right, so let's move on from traffic
Sure.
counts and parking studies. That one of the things that the opponents of this are saying is that the methodology used is flawed, slightly flawed.
Yeah.
So let's go into the design of what this thing is going to look like. We have a graphic up here on the screen that shows the existing sidewalk and then some parking beside that and then a bike lane and then the active roadway.
Yeah, well, let us explain.
Sure.
This is a compressed view of the entire stretch here.
Okay.
So
And we're
it's
gonna
like
have
you
to-
squished it down, accordioned it down, so you see the four segments from Oxford Street on the left down toward Inman Square on the right. And up at the top, you see a map showing where they actually are on the street. The bottom of the drawing shows the different street configurations in those segments.
So we have a lot of activity that is proposing to be done on different levels on Beacon Street. We will have a sidewalk that is elevated from the roadway. We have a proposed cycle path that is elevated from the roadway. We have surface level bike lanes. We have vehicular traffic. We have crosswalks. We have driveways. We have bus stops. We have parking meters. We have no parking. We have private driveways. We have a lot of stuff going on Beacon Street. And with the introduction of this cycle path, which will not go the entire length of Beacon Street, I had a couple of questions about it, and I asked Sam this, but I think it's important for folks at home to know. If this comes to fruition, will that cycle track be for the exclusive use of bicyclists?
No,
So we have the potential for pedestrians to be using it, wheelchair-bound folks, baby carriages,
Delivery zones.
rollerbladers, trash receptacles, delivery zones,
Snow.
snow, one of our favorite subjects here on Greater Somerville, snow buildup, treatment of that. The next question I always had is when the snowplow comes down the middle of Beacon Street, what happens to all the snow? It gets plowed up onto the cycle track?
Well, there are a couple of issues here about plowing. Now, first of all, the two sides of the street are very different. Where there's a cycle track, that on the north side you have the bike lane that is, or the cycle track that is just next to the street, except it's raised. And on the south side, you have it behind parking. On the side with parking, on the south side, it's behind a vertical curb. So in effect, it's like a sidewalk, except it's only 3 inches above the street. Mm-hmm. And then you have another 3 inches on the other side of it. So you have this 9 feet wide pathway with a curb that goes down on one side and a curb that goes up on the other side. The side that is adjacent to parking is directly adjacent to parking, so you have car doors opening into it. And if you're going to be safe riding this, you can't ride in the zone where someone might fling a car door open and get out.
And this, I think, is one of the major points of contention by folks who are saying the design of this cycle track has the propensity to increase that problem for cyclists known as dooring.
Well, you know, you're trading a left side dooring problem for a right side dooring problem.
Yep.
And then you have the issues with people putting out their trash barrels and so on. But you also have the driveway issue that you have this thing behind the parking all along the street. And whenever a car is pulling into a parking space, and let's say there's a tall SUV parked in that, or pulling into a driveway, and there's a tall SUV.
He's hindering the sight line.
Well, the driver's hood is pushed right out against the cycle track before the driver can see a bicyclist coming.
So we can, we have some visuals to kind of explain this a little bit better.
Yeah. We are. I'm going to have to remind you. I told you guys, 28 minutes flies by, but
wow,
because I do want to get to the part about what the business community feels about the loss of parking down there from an economic standpoint. I do want to talk about the dangers that are to pedestrians with this cycle path. So go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
Okay. So this is the city rendering that Hayes and Mark kind of showed you all last week, and you know, one of the things that was actually notated in the studies sent to Mass DOT by the city is that, you know, cycle tracks, you know, separated bikeways adjacent to the traveling cars, like that right hook style collision increases. And to kind of explain what that actually is.
Move on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now
well,
I see the turning movements here, yeah?
Yeah, well, I modified, I photoshopped this. So you see that the pickup truck in the foreground has to turn right from the left side of the bicyclist.
He's going from the travel lane, taking a right-hand turn across the dedicated cycle track and into another street.
Yes, but effectively also from one lane to the left. Now, this is how Chris Weigel got killed on Com Ave in December.
Cutting
a
across,
BU student, because a truck made a right turn from 2 lanes to the left.
Okay.
You have these issues at driveways that I mentioned. Here's an example from Long Beach, California, of actually a better designed cycle track, but you see the SUV that's just before the driveway, and if the car on this one-way street is making a left turn, the bicyclist and the driver, the motorist, can't see each other coming.
Let me ask a question out of the blue. Is there a false sense for cyclists for the cyclist traveling on a dedicated track, does he have a false sense of security?
It tends to build that, unfortunately. You heard my complaint about the word protected before. People think they're protected because the cars are over here and I'm over there on my bike. But actually, most car-bike accidents happen due to crossing and turning movements.
Sure.
The infamous, highly feared rear end collision is very rare in urban areas, and
Because of speed, I would take it.
yeah, the speed
Right.
differential isn't that much greater.
Right. How about pedestrians? What kind of dangers? You have alluded to the fact that the pedestrians are also in danger with this cycle track.
Well, mostly it's that pedestrians have to cross this. So instead of having two defined areas, the sidewalks and the street, you're on the sidewalk, you're safe. There won't be anything fast on the sidewalk. The street, well, you better watch out and look both ways. And
Which we're all accustomed
right.
to. Yeah.
But instead, now you have fast bicyclists in what is in effect a sidewalk area.
Are cyclists under the same rules of the road in terms of their speed on these cycle tracks?
There really aren't any rules of the road that apply
There
on
are
them
no
because
rules.
in effect legally they're sidewalks. And bicyclists travel at all different kinds of speeds from about 8 to 25 miles an hour. Let's move on to the next drawing.
Sure.
Here. Well, this one here, we have, just briefly, this drawing the city put out shows a cyclist riding the wrong way on their cycle track. believe it
John,
or
very
not.
quickly, when you say a bicyclist coming the wrong way, bicyclists are supposed to go in the flow of traffic.
That is correct.
If
And
you
these-
put in a dedicated cycle track, there is a propensity for cyclists to use it going the wrong way.
That is also true, but these are supposed to be one-way facilities.
And how do we monitor that? We don't.
Well, when is the last time a bicyclist got a traffic ticket in Somerville?
I get that. I did a show about that. It's on my blog, Greater Somerville, WordPress.com. I told you the 28 minutes was going to go very, very fast.
Let me just show you these next drawings here,
Go
because
quick.
I have a sequence.
Yep.
Here's the city's drawing. It's like 3 a.m. Sunday traffic. And so we just added, this is what it's really going to look like, perhaps with a little emphasis. I have a bicyclist who's fallen over in the puddle that forms inside.
He hydroplaned.
Well, he skidded because you have this mountable curb that isn't really mountable, and it's brick, so the snowplow tears it up.
You've identified a lot of these, and I would encourage the folks that are watching this program to watch the program with last week with Cayenne Anderson in the city of Somerville in their presentation. All of these things can be accessed online. We're going to link to them on our blog, but I want to thank my guests, Sam Coren and John Allen. The other thing I meant to ask you very, very quickly, what does Mass DOT say about the initial design? Do they like it or do they hate it?
So in December, Mass DOT's traffic and safety engineer, Jim Danilla, gave feedback to the design that was more or less submitted to Mass DOT. And he made this comment, justification for these cycle tracks really needs to go beyond just the perception of safety. You need to be designing them, for real life, dangers of the road.
Especially in the urban environment.
Especially in the urban environment.
Sam and John, I want to thank you again for Greater Somerville. I'm Joe Lynch. Stay tuned. I don't think we've heard the end of the cycle track on Beacon Street as part of the Beacon Street reconstruction. As always, stay safe, stay informed. See you next week.